You're listening to Believe It or Not with Kate Turkington on Talk Radio 702, your number one news and talk station.
Okay, here we are back again. I'm Kate Turkington. You're listening to Believe It or Not. Neil Colley doing the technical stuff. Miriam Matabula taking your calls. And Wendy Lando, who as we speak is off listening to Christa Berg, producing the show. And wasn't Nomsa Mdalosi lovely? I hope you enjoyed listening to her as much as I did. And I've said to her, please will she come back and tell us more. Well, we're going to cross to another part of Africa now. We're crossing to Ethiopia. Now, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawado Church is an Oriental Orthodox church in Ethiopia, and it was part of the Coptic Orthodox Church until 1959. I got this info off Wikipedia, so I hope it's correct, because I've always said to you, be very careful with Wikipedia. I mean, some of the stuff is absolutely brilliant, and I do use it a lot, but it is very often unedited, and you can't always be sure of the facts. But my next guest is sitting here nodding his head as I'm speaking, so far so good. Okay, so the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawado Church was part of the Coptic Orthodox Church until 1959, when it was granted its own patriarch by the Coptic Orthodox Pope of Alexandria and Patriarch of all Africa, Cyril VI. Now, it's the only pre-colonial Christian church of sub-Saharan Africa. Am I right, Pascal?
Yeah.
Okay, so far so good. It has a membership of about 40 million people. The Patriarch actually says 45 million, mainly in Ethiopia, and it's the largest of all the Oriental Orthodox churches. And if you've been listening to this program over the years, we have discussed Ethiopia on several occasions, particularly when I came back from a visit there 3 years ago. And I think we've always known that pinpointing a date as to when Christianity emerged in Ethiopia is very, very difficult, a mystery. Although Christianity existed far before the rule of King Ezana the Great of the Kingdom of Axum, the religion took a strong foothold when it was declared a state religion, wait for this, a state religion in 330 AD. I mean, just think about that. That's long before most of Europe was Christian. And the earliest and best known reference to the introduction of Christianity was when the evangelist Philip converted an Ethiopian traveller in the 1st century AD, and that's mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. Okay, that's a bit of context for you. But my next guest, who's sitting with me now in the studio, is Pascal Schmitz. Now, he travelled to Ethiopia in 2000 from London in search of the heart of the Rastafarian faith, which is found, of course, in Shashamane. But you actually went from being a Rastafarian to you followed the trail, shall we say, of Ethiopia's indigenous biblical heritage. Lots. I don't want to give the story away because I want to ask Pascal about the story. So first of all, Pascal, welcome very much.
Thank you.
And now tell us your story. You went to Ethiopia trying to get to the heart of Rastafarianism. Okay.
That's correct, yeah. 9 years ago, I traveled there to find the core of the Rastafarian community. I was told that Shashamane, which is a town about 200 kilometers south of Addis Ababa, was kind of the mecca of, the Rastafarian community.
I must tell you, he's got short ginger red hair. You don't have Rasta locks. So I know from some of the photos you did have Rasta locks in those days. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to say then he looks very waspish at the moment, although he does have quite an interesting T-shirt on. Anyway, okay, you were on your way to Shashamane.
In fact, no, I went to Shashamane and I lived there for about 6 weeks. But I had never had an inclination to go to Ethiopia before that, because information about Ethiopia as a sort of religious or spiritual country is quite sparse, and not a lot of people know about it. But I just discovered that there's a wealth of history there, that religion runs very deep in Ethiopia, and that Rastafarianism was basically a reflection of Ethiopian culture and religion and spirituality. And I decided to sort of delve deeper, and went back to Addis and made some connections with people who knew a lot about the church and the religion, and got a mentor who took me to the monasteries in Ethiopia. And that's where really, you're engaging with a religion that's 2,600 years old, essentially, because the temples in Ethiopia, the oldest temple is 2,600 years old. It was a Jewish temple from the time of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. That's really where the religion started. And Ethiopia it's totally unique in its form of Christianity. Ethiopia was like a second state of Israel. They were completely Jewish up until the first century. And as you say in the book of Acts, it's chapter 8, verse 23, if I'm not mistaken, the first Ethiopian was baptized by St. Philip. And so the religion spread by word of mouth, and it spread differently or uniquely to the rest of the world. It spread from the top down. So where in Rome, Christianity was first the faith of the poor, and it was sort of like something that bonded people that were oppressed by a sort of hedonistic state. In Ethiopia, it was actually the royalty that adopted the faith first, and sort of then spread it to the rest of the country. But Ethiopia just is like a custodian of really old Christian traditions. They haven't changed anything. In fact, in the monasteries, they still write on parchments. They don't even want to use paper. And it's almost like going into a museum of Christianity and going back 2,000 years and seeing exactly how it was at the time.
Different excuse me, the differences are the major differences between Ethiopian Christianity, obviously I'm asking you to generalize,
yes,
and Christianity perhaps as we know it in Africa and in the West.
Well, that's a hot topic, but I mean, without getting into a theological debate or anything, certain things that I found were almost 180 degrees to what Christianity has become in the modern world. So things like in Ethiopia, Christianity is a religion that is completely non-judgmental. An Ethiopian Christian, for example, takes it upon himself or believes that he doesn't have the right to judge another person. That is God's place to do that. So the first thing I noticed when I was there was that nobody was trying to convert me or preach to me or trying to shove some religion down my throat. People in Ethiopia live their religion. They live it, and they believe if they live it well, it will be an example to others, and others will follow and ask, like I did. I started to ask people. I started to inquire. I said, what do you believe in? What is this? There's something going on here that I can see there's a religion in place and there's a spirituality in this country, but what is it? And only upon asking did I start to get answers, and people started to engage with me about their faith. So that's something I found different from the West, where it's almost marketed and it's become very commercialized in a sense. And Ethiopia, like I say, it's a custodian. They haven't changed anything. So
what did they tell you when you asked questions? First of all, what sort of questions did you ask?
Well, the first encounter I had was I went back to Addis, and I just went to the sort of central church in Addis called Gorgis Beta Christian, which was built by Haile Selassie. It's a very old church in the center of Addis. And I went there and just imitated what people were doing, and entered into the church, and in the wrong entrance on the first time, but that was okay. People sort of, understood that I was new. And I just basically studied the icons and the artwork that was there, because Ethiopian churches are painted from wall to wall.
I know, they're absolutely wonderful, with those beautiful doe-eyed, slow-eyed, honey-skinned angels and saints. So beautiful.
Yeah. So I spent 3 days basically just reading the walls. And obviously, some of it fascinated me, and I could sort of understand what it was, because a lot of it is biblical stories that are painted, but some of it I had no idea what it was. And it was on the third day that an old lady came to me and started talking to me in Amharic, and I had no idea what she was saying. And a man came to interpret. He said, "Do you know what she's saying?" I said, "No." He said, "She's just appreciating that you came and respected our faith and our church, and that you came and kissed the wall and bowed like the others did. And she just wants, God to bless you and have a fruitful life." And he then proceeded to take me in and explain to me what all these icons meant and what it was. And I just couldn't get enough. I just basically asked, and he answered, and it got dark. And I said, "Can you come tomorrow?" And he said, "Sure." And he came the next morning, and again we conversed. It got dark, and a year went by.
My word, a year. And I mean, did you have to be baptized? I mean, what was the process to become a sort of an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian?
I was baptized in May of that year, but it was my own. I asked to be baptized. I basically said, "I believe in this. I believe that this is the right way, and I want to be baptized." Nobody ever came to me and said, "You ought to be," or "You should be," or it's a prerequisite. I was going to all the ceremonies, going to monasteries, and people were perfectly accepting of me as a non-believer or a pagan or whatever the term would be. Like I said, they're not judgmental. They believe in Ethiopia. If you're here, you're meant to be here. God sent you here for whatever reason. I'm not going to judge why you're here. And if you ask questions, I'll answer. But I decided then, yes, I wanted to be part of this, this religion, and I asked to be baptized, and I was then baptized in a little church in the countryside. In May of that year, yeah.
And the response of local people, I mean, a sort of European, a non-Ethiopian coming along and saying, "I want to become part of your church." I mean, were you regarded as an oddity or eccentric, or one of these, these sort of mad woo-woo Europeans who want to hang out with the locals?
Interesting, another thing that I think plays to Ethiopia's advantage is they were never colonized. So Ethiopia was never colonized. They never experienced a suppression by a colonial state, whatever. So they don't have issues with color and race and these sort of things. So for me, basically, I was a guest for a year. For 1 year. I mean, I went there, to be honest, I had absolutely no money. By the second month, I had run out of any funding, and I basically just lived there for a year on the kindness of people, because I was a permanent guest. People were very delighted that I was there. They were very delighted that I had joined the faith, obviously, and yeah, it was a permanent being a permanent guest.
Are there many other Europeans who've become Orthodox Ethiopian Christians?
I believe there are. I heard of rumors of others. In South Africa, I believe I'm the only one in the congregation. So our congregation is in Berea. There's a church, and in Pretoria now they'll be inaugurating one in January. It'll be the first one in Pretoria, and those will be the only two official Ethiopian Orthodox churches, and there I'm the only white person in the congregation, yes. But there have been others that have come to Ethiopia and gone, yes.
Now, hermits.
Yes.
I remember when I was in Lalibela, or Lalibela, however you choose to pronounce
Lalibela,
it.
yeah.
Lalibela, thank you. Those wonderful rock-hewn underground churches. Just to give you some idea, the top of the churches are flat with the ground, and you actually go down narrow passageways, and you come eventually to the bottom of a deep excavation, and there in front of you is a huge church. I mean, you cannot believe these churches. Imagine that you put any church in South Africa into a hole in the ground, and the top of it was level with the ground. That gives you some idea of these rock-hewn Ethiopian churches that were hewn sometimes out of single blocks of rock.
Yeah, monolithic. That's
yes,
right.
that's
Coincidentally, I was married in that church.
Were you really? Oh, goodness me. Oh, goodness. And what I want to say, as you go around these churches, and I'm being highly subjective here, there are holes, there are caves in the walls. And in each little cave, which will be about sometimes only the size of your armchair, not very much bigger, lives a hermit. and that hermit lives there. Just lives there for, I don't know, till they die maybe, and people give them food and they pray and they read their Bibles. And I remember saying to the friend I was travelling with, I can't think of anything worse than to be a hermit and live in a hole in the wall. Your view of this, Pascal?
Well, I obviously have a different take.
I'm sure you do.
I can say the best time I've had in my life was in a cave in Ethiopia. I stayed in a monastery called Abuna Hapta Mariam, which is entirely carved out of the mountain.
Where is that?
It's about 80 kilometers north of Addis.
Okay.
I think the closest town is Fiche, but it's about a 2-hour walk down from a very large monastery called Debra Lebanos, which is essentially like a university for monks. It's a really fascinating place because you get monks from all over the country, and they all dye their sort of robes with the soil from where they're from. So you get all these monks running around in these different colored robes, and they're there to study. They come there to study scriptures and study special books that they have, because Ethiopia has a large collection of sort of biblical books, way out beyond the Bible and sort of the known scriptures. And from there you go 2 kilometers, you hike down, and there in the sort of ravine they have this monastery which is caves. Basically, the church itself has been carved into the wall of the mountain, and I stayed there on the one side with a monk in one of these caves, and basically went through sort of the process of letting go of material possessions, attachments to ego, things like that, So I just went through this process to achieve sort of.
It must have been so horribly uncomfortable. That's my first thought. Or do you forget about the discomfort?
You absolutely forget about it.
Do
absolutely,
you?
It becomes part of it.
Just talk us quickly through that process then. Okay, you go there, you're in the cave with the monk, then just talk us through, a kind of speeded up version, a fast forward version of what happens.
Okay, first of all, you don't own anything. So anything you did bring belongs to the community. You must let go of having possessions or the sort of idea of owning things. Then you start to use, it's kind of like cutting cords. We're attached to so many things in the world, beyond material things. Even we're attached to egos, emotions. What drives us, aspirations, whether we want to be better than our friend in school and achieve more, whatever. All these things you got to cut the cords and let them go, so that you basically just focus on yourself and God, and you don't have any other attachments in between. And that's a process you go through. The process the monk taught me was basically 7 times a day there's a prayer sequence, and combined with that is like a prostration sequence where you sort of make yourself tired as well, just to even let go of the physical, and then reading scriptures. And it goes from 6 in the morning till 7 at night. Right through, and then at 7 o'clock at night the monk would feed us, because there were other people as well in the cave. Most of them were possessed. In fact, that's why they were there, for exorcism, but I was the only non-possessed.
Reasonably sane, although that could be argued. Yes.
And then we'd eat at 7, so the monk would feed us. You don't eat yourself even. You don't even, because even eating food is like, oh, I'm hungry, let me have this. It's sort of like letting go of all of that. So the monk would feed you, hand feed you, and you'd eat whatever you're given. And then you go to bed at 8, and then you're up at midnight. And then there's a sequence that goes from midnight till 5 in the morning of praying and prostrating. And then you go to bed at about 5:30, and then you're up again at 6, and so you go.
Well, I'm not into past lives or future lives, but if there were any, I do not want to be a monk in a cave in Ethiopia. But having said that, I'm being disrespectful and frivolous, and I don't mean to be at all, because I think that takes an enormous amount of courage, an enormous amount of spiritual devotion to achieve that. And what's the point?
The point is to focus. The point is to like I said, to cut all the attachments and clear your mind completely. You're not getting busy. Your mind is a very busy thing. It's always busy. So because you do this, you sort of like focus your mind on spiritual aspects, and you focus your mind on God, essentially. You really focus on God, not just think about God, talk about God. You really just you focus on God the whole day till you can feel God.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a palpable kind of experience.
Exactly, yes.
Maurizio says he was born in Ethiopia and it was an Italian colony. I don't think so, Maurizio. I think the Italians tried but failed, I seem to remember.
Historical fact, Italy did invade Ethiopia in the 1940s. They were there for 5 years, but it was never a colony. Ethiopians never relinquished control or gave in to the invasion, so they basically fought for 5 years. Haile Selassie, who was the emperor at the time, left the country to sort of gain support in the West, and only when the fascists invaded Europe, because Haile Selassie in 1923 went to the League of Nations. Ethiopia was the only country that was a member state of the League of Nations from Africa, which is quite a thing in itself at the time. Most other African countries were enslaved. And he went and warned of the fascist invasion, but they didn't listen because it was inconvenient to sort of fight with Italy at the time. But once Italy and Germany invaded the rest of Europe, they then went to the aid of Ethiopia, and England sent troops from Sudan and from Kenya, and they pushed the Italians out 5 years later and got the country back. But it was not a colony. That is a historical fact.
Okay, there you go, Maurizio. Now, so you lived in a cave, you became a hermit, you lived with...
No, I did not become a hermit, no. I stand corrected.
Okay, sorry.
I was living in a monastery.
You shared a hermit's existence for some time. And you said you were living with people who went there to be exorcised.
Yes,
Tell us about that. I mean, you were with a bunch of loonies, basically.
Well, the people were quite nice. It was the spirits that were loony. The particular monk I was living with, his speciality was treating possessed people. So, in Ethiopia, they sort of people that are possessed go to like holy water places or go to the church and they're treated. But in extreme cases where they couldn't be dealt with in the sort of the normal treatment. This sounds very bizarre now, but it's very average in Ethiopia. It's a standard, practice. They would be brought to this particular monk who would then treat them over several weeks, and eventually, they would be cleared.
Would they?
Yes,
was there a success rate?
There was. I saw 3 people that were.
I remember some years ago going to a valley. Maybe one of you listening will know, to a valley near Rustler's Valley in the Maluti Mountains, where there were lots and lots of different shamans and healers and medicine men and women. And I remember there seeing so-called, and I put this in inverted commas, possessed or mad people who'd been sent there by their families to be healed and cured. Mm-hmm. So you definitely saw cures.
Definitely, yeah. And in fact, the interesting thing is that most of the interesting information I learned about this sort of the ethereal world was from these possessed people, when they were in the possessed state. In other words, when the spirit was in control of them instead of them being control of themselves. I would actually talk. There was one particular one who was kind of friendly, and I would talk to him, and he would tell me sort of in detail how he got there, where he came from the center of the earth, etc. And that was really, very interesting for me to get that in an interview type of situation.
Are you going to write all this down, Pascal?
If I get time one day, I'd love to, yes.
And what are you doing now?
I have a production company. I'm a producer, so I do different kinds of productions, but I'd like to do mostly documentaries on Ethiopia, on the things I've done. So I'm not good at writing. I'd rather go there with a camera and shoot it and, show it to people on television.
I remember, I think it was last year, Neil, we interviewed Prof. Tudor Parfit about the Lost Ark of the Covenant. He's quite a famous media scholar, wonderful, one of these great English eccentrics, who goes to far-off places and finds amazing things, but very academically respectable too. I think he's with the School of Oriental Languages in London. But I think his most recent book, I haven't seen one since, is called The Lost Ark of the Covenant. And of course, when you go to Ethiopia, people there always tell you the Lost Ark of the Covenant is there somewhere in Axum.
It's common knowledge there.
Well, he claimed he found it in a museum in Zimbabwe. In fact, Robert Mugabe pinched it and put it in his private collection, but it was a wooden artifact that had, he had traced it historically, and I'm sure there is more than one Ark of the Covenant. Did you hear people talk about it?
It's in Ethiopia. I mean, even myself, I believe it's there. It's just. It's like saying in South Africa, the parliament is in Cape Town. That's how common sense it is in Ethiopia. The Ark of the Covenant is in Aksum. Nobody even refutes that in Ethiopia. And there's been a lot of research done into it. And probably the most obvious thing that points to it is that to this day, Ethiopian ceremonies or sort of churchical traditions at Easter or Christmas or very big events, especially at Epiphany, and the arks come out. Every church has an ark, so they make a replica of that ark. For every single church has to have an ark in it, and some of them have up to 44. So you have arks of different angels and saints, etc. And those come out and are still walked through the streets. There's still a procession, and people come and bow to the Ark. So there's still the culture that was, practiced in the time of the Ark of the Covenant being in Israel, still practiced to this date in Ethiopia. So that's how fresh it is. It's not like it's an archaeological object somewhere in a room. It's part of everyday life in Ethiopia.
And if we want to see any of the films you've done or work you've done, how can we access them?
I just did a documentary on the Rastafarian community in Ethiopia, which was on SABC2. That was 3 weeks ago. It screened. I'm sure they'll repeat it. It's called Pascal's Journey. And then we did
Well, maybe if you give us a website, Pascal.
You can go to my website to get details, which is www.amariam.co.za. That's AMARIAM. .co.za, Amariam, which means for Mary in Amharic.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, I must say. Thank you very much. Let me give the address of that website then, and we'll put it up on our own website too. Amariam.co.za, AMARIAM, Amariam.co.za. Thanks so much, Pascal Smith, for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Thanks to Crime Line.